So there it is, it's come up now. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and for those who are watching online, this is another one of our amazing ITRC seminars, and we have with us esteemed Professor Nigar Khawaja, who is also an adjunct professor with the ITRC. So thank you. And Nigar was also one of the review panel who looked at our application and provided some really helpful advice in our process to become a full university research centre. So acknowledge and thank you for your contributions there. This afternoon, I'll just read Nigar's bio. Nigar's a clinical psychologist and a professor at QUT, a fellow with the Psychological Society College of Clinical Psychology. There's lots of words in that one, and significantly contributed to the field with her pioneering work in cultural safety and competency training for professionals. Nigar has a cross-cultural research focus that challenges to address the challenges faced by migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and international students. Professor Khawaja has developed culturally sensitive assessment tools and interventions, and in her presentation today, she will share some learnings from her extensive research. So on that note, I'll pass over to you. I'm so excited about hearing your presentation today, looking at breaking barriers, psychological wellbeing amongst culturally diverse populations in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And thank you very much. I really appreciate this invitation, and I really appreciate you linking me to your center. That's wonderful. Now, let me see if I can. All right. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners. I'm at Turrbal and Yagara land, but I know most of you are Kabi Kabi land or on other lands. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands from where we're working today, and also like to pay my respect to the elders past and present. And before I go on, I just want to let you know that my lived experience had a lot to do with what I've been doing in my life. As you can see, I'm myself from diverse culture. I am multilingual, and I just grew up where my parents and grandparents have been through a civil war. I myself have been through 2 wars, displaced in 1 war. I have been an international student. I've also been an immigrant. So I'm all these sort of lived experiences shaped my research in one way or the other. I'm going to talk about some of my papers and some of my work, but if anybody interested in getting more details, please do welcome to go to the ePrints or to the ORCID. Now, I have a lot of people who I am very appreciative of, who contributed tremendously to my work. My very esteemed colleagues, and 2 in particular, as you can see on the slide, but a lot of my students, honors, masters, DPsych, PhD, they all have tremendously contributed, and I'm very thankful to them. And also my collaborators, Queensland Education and Queensland Health, and the funders. So my goal as a clinical psych has been to understand people, vulnerable people, and to how to assess them and how to treat them in a better way and how to promote their well-being. I was particularly interested in people from diverse backgrounds because psychology has been monocultural in the past. It originated in the West, it progressed in the West, and there has been the culturally diverse or non-Western population has been under-researched. So after working here and migrating to Australia, I just thought it would be really important to pay attention to those who are coming from diverse backgrounds. So today the goal is to just orient you to the recent literature and then to share some of the research that I've done, which highlights acculturation and mental health issues of culturally and linguistically diverse populations, which are migrants and refugees and asylum seekers. I'll talk a little bit about what I found on the basis of adults, and then what I found on the basis of young people and elderly, and then just talk about some of my new developments in assessments, intervention, a little bit about challenges and future directions. Okay, so called or culturally and linguistically diverse population is the term used for people like me who migrated somewhere else or who have at least a parent born in another country. Now, called are people who have come from a culture which is very different to that of Australia, and they do not speak English language. If you look at our statistics, nearly 1/3 of the people are coming from somewhere else. And we know that there is a first generation and second generation, but most of these people who migrate are young, and important to note that half of this population is under 18, so a lot of minors. We also know that now the top countries that are producing the immigrants are like India, China, Philippines, UK, New Zealand, and we know that there are 200 plus languages spoken in Australia. This is over and above our First Nation, because we know that First Nation also speak a lot of languages and dialects. So migrants are people who are pulled toward another country, so they make a conscious decision to leave for better opportunities, better quality of life, occupational as well as educational. They have very high aspiration. They want to do really well. They put a lot of pressure on their children also. We know that second generation is often more torn between the two worlds, like their previous heritage and their new culture. When we look at the refugees and asylum seekers, they are the ones who are pushed out of their homeland because their life is in danger. If they stay, they would certainly die. So due to this threat, they leave, and often to the neighboring countries, and then apply to UNHCR, and it can take like a decade or even more for them to get replaced and resettled in another safe country. So what are some of the common characteristics? Well, these are all a minority group, and they're visibly different. They're culturally, ethnically different. They have varying levels of English language. They have varying exposure to schooling and employment. It's also important to remember that we do see a healthy migrant effect. What it means is that as Australia cherry picks migrants, so not everybody is allowed to enter. Australian government is very particular who enter the country, and they have to enter only if they're going to be able to contribute to the Australian society. So we do see a lot of very educated, well-to-do people moving and then doing really well. But literature also indicates that after a little while, when the honeymoon period is over, they can start feeling challenges, and their well-being and mental health can go down. Overall, it's important to remember that most of those people, immigrants or who come from some other part of the world, do really well, and they're very resilient. However, there is a small population that is very distressed. So in my own research, I found that those people who like there was one of the research was done with children, and they were compared with the Australian local children, and the immigrants and the children from refugee backgrounds were doing much better on the well-being, most of them, except then we saw a smaller population really with compromised mental health well-being and issues. Okay, so a little bit about the literature. So these are some of the common concepts that come up in the cross-cultural and transcultural literature. Acculturation refers to psychosocial adaptations that all newly arrived people have to go through. So when newly arrived people interact with the locals, they go through a change. There is a shift. Now we can see different things. We can see separation. We can see where people sort of get together with their own ethnic groups and form a little bubble, and they have nothing to do with the rest of the society. We can also see integration, where they hold on to their own values and culture, but also adopt a lot of new things from the new society. We can also see assimilation, where just sort of they give up their own culture and completely blend into the new culture. And finally, we see marginalization, where they're not mingling with their own ethnic groups, or they are mingling with the locals, but they are very isolated. And this is the one which is sort of, I guess, is more vulnerable and can be at risk. We also see acculturation stress. What it means is that when people are adapting, there is a psychological strain, there's a psychological stress. And people very often go through culture shock because what they see is very different. They have to settle down. They have to find a place to live. They have to find job. They have to get their degrees what is called approved. So there's a lot of things they have to do, and it's all very difficult. Or often they have to learn the language and get used to the environment also. We see that people acculturate at different degrees, and the picture here just indicates that sometimes members of the family acculturate at different rate. While some are acculturating highly, the others may not be, and there could be conflicts, and children can get caught up in between. And we also know this last picture is about intergenerational conflicts, that sometimes when people acculturate, some of them are holding on to the heritage culture while the others, often the younger generation, is moving on, and we can see clashes between the two cultures. We also see that people can be singled out, and there could be prejudices and racism. Okay, so the literature is indicating risk factors and protective factors. Cultural and language barriers and lacking skills, education is often a risk because that will then not let them find an employment, and there could be financial strains. With the gender, the language, the literature is not clear because some study says, well, male are more under duress because they have to go out and they have to find their way and they have to sort of be often the breadwinners. But on the other hand, some studies are saying that the girls are at more distress, but we don't know. But what we clearly know is that the pre and post-migration challenges can be a risk factor. All of these people who come from somewhere else are often dealing with economical crisis, but and grief and loss because they are losing and they're just disconnecting from people they have been living with. On the other hand, those who are coming from war-torn countries can bring trauma also with them. Post-migration challenges are all the challenges that all the people who arrive from somewhere else have to encounter as they're settling down. Protective factors, on the other hand, are cultural strengths, their resilience and coping, the social support they may be getting from here, from Australia, or even from back home, a sense of belonging, this idea that they are fitting in and they are valuable, as well as their English and employment skills. Okay, so we also know from the literature that there are a lot of barriers when it comes to seeking professional help. Language and cultural barriers can prevent people from seeking professionals. Sometimes it's stigma or it's just lack of knowledge and certain belief system, which can prevent them from seeking help, or the mistrust of the health system. We also are aware of the structural factors. For example, a lot of the people without any permanent visa are not eligible to Medicare. It can be difficult to navigate hospital and the health system here. There could be practical issues like transport and language. There could be racism also. And finally, not all service is culturally fair and culturally sensitive or safe. And people can sort of feel that that's not of an advantage, and sometimes they just approach a service but they drop out. We also know from the literature that a number of times our assessment tools and diagnostic tools are not effective because people are overdiagnosed or underdiagnosed, and very often the intervention that they are offered may not be culturally safe and sensitive, and therefore people drop out. So the research that I'm going to talk about has used all different types of methodologies. I was originally, when I did my own PhD, I was trained in quantitative methods. So I have used lots of scales, and all the time it's translating, back translating, and doing cross-sectional work. But then I found, as I got into this type of work, that there is a limit of the scales, and I was using then qualitative methods. So I'm a convert. I moved from quantitative to qualitative, and I also used mixed method. Just wanted to point out, this is my learning, that research with cold is very time consuming and hard because only even the ethical clearance takes a lot of time, 3 times more time and effort than any other research. And we must be invited by the community, and we must have tangible outcomes for the community, and we must have a trusting relationship with the community. Otherwise, we are not going to be successful. So before we do any research, this is something I've learned, you have to spend a lot of time of building relations. Okay, so now I'm going to present some of the studies that I've done with the migrant population. So this study was in a collaboration with Queensland Health. The Transcultural Mental Health Centre, which is part of Queensland Health, was offering services to CALL population, and they collected data for 3 years, and we got a number of clients. One, as you can see, nearly 1,500 people participated, and the data was collected with a lot of people over 3 years. And the goal was to see why are they seeking help, what are their needs, and how can we improve the future health delivery models. And as you can see, they were coming from many countries and spoke a number of languages. So we found out that most of the people who were using this service were adult, and again, women, a little bit more women than men, and they were coming out with reporting mood problems, which is depression, schizophrenia or psychosis, anxiety, and psychosocial challenges. When we explored the psychosocial challenges in more detail, we found out that they were all acculturation related issues, like having difficulty adapting, having role conflicts, intergenerational conflicts, finding it very hard to navigate the new society and the new environment. In another study, my goal was to find out what is the mental health issues like again, but I found out that the distress was really low. Most of the people were doing well, but when we look at those who were distressed, it became apparent that it was more of a ruminations, a lot of worries and interpersonal issues. And it sort of makes sense because people coming from non-Western cultures are coming from collectivistic societies. So interpersonal issues are often common. And but still, all these sort of challenges were only of a mild to moderate nature. So again, the important thing is that most of the people were doing well. The small population was having some compromised mental health, and which was also not very intense. Okay, sorry about that page. Okay, so further, I was interested in finding out what are the factors that are contributing to psychological distress. Difficulty in English, speaking English language, and the avoidance type of a coping, where they sit and they don't do anything about the issues, was leading to psychological distress. Oh, sorry about this. Okay, so this is another study that we conducted with the Taiwanese migrants living in Brisbane. Now, you probably know that migrants often live in small enclaves. They could be a group of people who are living in a particular part of the city, and it's like living in a little bubble, and they go to their own they buy vegetables from people from their own ethnicity, they go to their own ethnic doctors, they go to their own a bank where somebody speaks their language. So they can live in this bubble. And I was interested with a couple of colleagues to see what's going on. And we found out that in spite of being in the bubble, their well-being was quite good. Then we looked at acculturation and found out that as the older they were and the longer they've lived in Australia and the English was good, all these factors were helping with acculturation. And if they didn't have the English or they lacked social support, then they were more distressed. And finally, subjective well-being was again impacted by the age. So the older you are, the longer you've lived in Australia, and the more social support you have, then your well-being is also elevated. So it doesn't matter if they use a separation method of acculturation, as long as they have support and they have the tools like English language, they do quite okay. This, sorry about this, it keeps jumping up. Okay, this another study was looking at the acculturation of families who come from South Korea. Now, I was interested with my other fellow colleagues to find out what is going on, why do they migrate, and what are their experiences in Australia like. It is very interesting to find out that their reasons of migration were very different from other people coming from other countries. They were not here for more economical benefits, but they were here because they liked the relaxed lifestyle of Australia. Back in South Korea, life was very difficult. It's a very high pressure society where people are expected to do well, achieve highly, accomplish a lot, and secure a lot of materialistic gains. So they got fed up of that type of a high pressure society and moved here. However, after moving here, once they started to mingle with the community, those pressures came back because the community was still putting a pressure and looking at if are your children highly educated or you have all those type of materialistic gains or not. So it was another interesting study to see that community can act as a double-edged sword. Communities can be very supportive, but can also put pressure on people. Okay. All right, this study was conducted to see the well-being of young Muslims. And I was particularly interested because young Muslims have gone through a very difficult time after the 9/11. They've been in the limelight for all sorts of wrong reasons, and the media have presented them in a very negative way. So we looked at young adults here, and what I found out was that a number of factors were acting as facilitators. For example, on the top, we had family and friends and community culture. So they liked to be connected with other people, and they also had a very strong desire to be connected with the society, overall society, and wanted to fit in. And personal resources were also very helpful. And the infrastructure, like factors like money and income, were really the last priority for them. When asked to elaborate on barriers, they pointed out that Islamophobia and prejudices in the society, when they're rejected by the society, that brings their well-being down. And then after this, if they're having negative relationship with family and friends, they'd lack the personal resources, and sometimes just navigating through so many cultures. They have their own culture, they have this culture of the host society. They have so many community groups. Just navigating through these groups could also put a pressure on them and impact their well-being. Now I'm going to talk about some of the studies which involve refugees. And as you know, Australia is signatory to this 1951 convention, according to which Australia every year accepts a certain number of refugees from the war-torn countries. Now, each year, the government decides which country they're going to focus. There was a time that South Sudanese were being taken, and this is when this research was conducted. And a little bit about South Sudan. South Sudan has been one of the countries where recently there have been very violent conflicts. Nearly 2 million people were internally displaced and 2 million people had to leave the country, had to flee. And now we know a lot about South Sudanese, and we know that they had to walk for many, many, many miles once their villages were destroyed and a lot of people were killed. They had to either go to the neighboring country, which was Egypt, or they had to go to Kenya, and there was a camp, Kukuma camp set up for them. So a lot of people walked for thousands of miles to get to the camp or to the Egypt. So we also know that once they settled down here, and you may remember this is from one of the newspaper, there were a lot of problems also in the society. There was just a lot of fear, and there was a lot of negative interactions with the South Sudanese communities, and this type of stories came up in the newspaper. So our first goal was to find out about the difficulties and how they're coping. And they talked a lot about the war in the country, which went on for 20 years. And they talked about how everything was razed to the ground. There was so much death and so much trauma, so much of injury, poverty, really starvation. And some of the comments will indicate, for example, I was 10 or so in the village raid. I picked up my baby sister and ran to the bushes with a cousin who was 6. I ran and could not find my way back. I reached another camp miles away. I did not see my family for 7 months. So this is for some of the experiences they were having. And I was really struck by one of the participants who said that we dug holes to hide during the day. At night, we used to come out to look for food. I thought this is what the world is. And she was 5 at the time war broke out. And when she was interviewed, she was 25. And she told me that this is the type of life they lived for nearly 20 years. So then there were difficulties in the transit. Sometimes they had to stay in the transit for 1 decade or 15 years or so, while those who went to Egypt were just thrown out of the country. They were not accepted. So they had to go in hiding, work at nighttime, and were really badly treated. After coming here, there were a lot of challenges also, environmental mastery, poverty, and all those intergenerational conflicts and racism. However, they coped through religion and they coped through reframing and normalizing. So despite all these very aversive experiences, they had hope and they had wishes and they were very optimistic. So they were very optimistic that they are moving towards a better life and the life of the children is going to be better. This is something that kept them going. So I then sort of, with other colleague, try to explore a little bit more what their acculturative stresses were and how they're managing. And so what we found out is that once these people are here, men were unemployed and felt disempowered. They also talked about loss of their traditional problem solving and structure and repetition and identity, a lot of confusion around what freedom was. They talked about that the children, because of all the negative news and information that was in the media, rejected their own identity and did not want to link themselves with South Sudan. So there was a loss of identity and they sort of got alienated from the family. A lot of them got caught up with wrong crowd and got involved in criminal activities. And so the families were disintegrating. When the parents tried to intervene, or they were or they were sort of trying to discipline them, the children would ring the police and the parents would get into trouble and the children would be taken over and placed somewhere else. Now, the parents could not understand why the government, who they saw as like chiefs or somebody who's there to support them, is taking their children away. So they also were very confused with the idea of freedom, because they suddenly felt, the young people particularly felt, that they are free, they can do anything. They did not they understand that there are obligations also along with the freedom. Next, we just explored a bit more on the relationships and conducted focus group with some Sudanese to find out what's going on. And we then learned that back in their own country, men were often the breadwinners and doing all the chores outside the house, while women were in the house and with the help of other women were taking care of the household chores. Men were the people who had the money, or they controlled the money, or the animals or the assets. When they moved here, men were given money from the Centrelink, which they did not share with their wife, or they were not really taking care of the needs. So the women went to Centrelink and asked for the money to be divided, and that's what Centrelink did. So once the money was divided, women didn't know how to use it and went on shopping sprees and wasted a lot of money. And this used to create conflicts between the couples, and there were then fights, and there were then police getting involved. And some of the times the children were also sort of misbehaving, and the parents were very punitive, and the police was again getting involved. And the women also reported that back home they had a lot of support. There were a lot of other women to help. Here they have to deal with everything all by themselves, while their husbands were no longer involved and often playing cards or being in some type of an entertainment. And this type of conflicts that they were experiencing, really they became very, very problematic. And this is why a lot of police was involved, but they had no idea how to deal with this type of challenges. So the data that sort of was collected also indicated that they were looking for programs. They wanted programs to be organized for people, for new arrival immediately after the arrival. And they thought that this has to be conducted by the Sudanese as well as Australian teams together. And they thought that it is really important that practical skills, for example, budgeting is taught, and people are prepared for the roles and how there are going to be changes in the roles. And they said, like, let Australian men help Sudanese men, because of course, men have to now shift and change. And they also said that we need to learn how to communicate about problems such as how to manage money and how to discipline our children also. So they were very, very concerned about their youth, and they wanted to protect their youth. Okay, so I'm going to now talk about some of the research which I've done as a part of a linkage grant, and the goal was to understand the employment experiences of recently arrived refugees, their aspirations, and their communications and intergenerational communication. So the three refugee groups were people from Myanmar, Ethiopia, and Congo, and they had to complete some skills which were back translated in their languages, and also they were also interviewed using their own languages through people who spoke their languages. So first of all, we found that most of these people were unemployed, and English was a major barrier. If they didn't know English, it was very hard to find a job. They often were unwell, so they were sick also as a result of all the war and being in transit for many, many years, or they were caring for another ill family member. Sometimes they had the jobs, sometimes they had the qualification and the skills, but still they were not able to find jobs. We were then interested in what are the predictors of the employment, and some of those demographics like being a male, being here for a longer duration, or English proficiency and education was coming up as factors that contributed to their employment. It was interesting to note that as they became employed, they started reporting a higher acculturative stress. So that's where the challenges with the locals came up. When they were unemployed, their acculturation was higher. So what it means is that those who were unemployed, they thought that they're really doing well in the new society and they're getting along well with the locals also, because I think the relationship was probably from all this interaction was from a distance. Once they were thrown in the new jobs and they had a lot of interaction with the locals, then the stress came up. We also looked at the life satisfaction. So the quantitative analysis indicated that resilience played a big role in the life satisfaction, plus those who were employed, though there was a small number of people who were employed out of this sample, but they were doing better than those unemployed. And then qualitative data indicated that being safe or being able to practice one's religion, being employed, fostered life satisfaction. So being from Myanmar was more tough because these people were primarily farmers and they were less skilled and they had lower level of education, and that is why they faced more challenges than the two other groups. Then we looked at their aspirations, and it was interesting that they had very high aspirations. So these are the jobs which are more blue collar, and if you can see on the other side, these are with high columns. These are all white collars jobs, professional jobs. So all of them aspire to be managers or doctors or teachers. However, they didn't know how to get to their goals. So though they had very high aspirations, they didn't know the pathway that led to those goals. And we also found differences in the three groups. There were Congo and Myanmar people who were more recently arrived and been here for less time, had much higher aspirations than people who've been Ethiopian, who've been here for a bit longer time. So people who are newly arrived do have very high aspirations. However, they don't know how to achieve their goals. So we were interested there in their intergeneration communications. What are parents telling their children? What are their conversations? What's going on between them? And we found out that parents were really interested in their children integrating and doing well, but they also wanted to preserve their cultures. Mother in particular was staying at home, and those who were acculturated, employed, or satisfied with their lives were the ones communicating more with children and inspiring them. Dads who were often working, were busy, were not talking so much, and people who were unhappy with the jobs and situations were not talking a lot with the children. But the important thing is that what we found out is that the participants did not know how to go about getting the degrees, what is happening in the university, what are the career pathways. So though there was a lot of interest, they didn't know how to go about. Okay, now I'm going to just talk about some of the work I've done with the children from call background, and they were refugees, and then there were some who were coming from the immigrant background. With the refugees, it's very important to note that just like adults, they're also going through war-related atrocities, and they're displaced also. They're in camps for a long time. They deal poverty and malnutrition. So it is very serious because a child is in a developmental phase, and all children need to have a safe environment, and they need to have stability in their lives, and they need to have a good, healthy food, and also stimulation and education. So if they are deprived of all these things, all these experiences, then there's going to be some impact on their well-being. So we were invited to work with one of the schools, that's Milpera, because we know schools play a very important role in the acculturation and social support and connectedness of these children who come from other parts of the world, but very little is understood. So Milpera is a very specialized school, and this is a transitional school where children who are coming from somewhere else go to learn English language, but it also plays a role in the settlement and also train them to sort of this new type of an educational environment. And it also offers them some rehabilitation. Usually young people stay there for maybe 1 to 1.5 years. So at this particular school, the school was interested in what are the predictors of psychosocial emotional adjustment and academic success. And they wanted us to just keep an eye on longitudinal basis to see what happens as children from this school goes to other regular schools. So all these young people were given a cognitive screener, which was language free, but then they had to go through a lot of other checklists, but these checklists were given to them in their own languages through interpreters. So there were 247 children. They were male and equal number of male and female, and from 49 countries, spoke a lot of languages from all different religious groups. Nearly half of them were refugees, another half were migrants, and they all were struggling with the English language because they were just here to start learning the language. So it was of interest to see, are there any difference between the two groups? And we found out that refugees, those coming from refugee background, had the higher acculturation, so they were adapting more, and they were also more resilient, even though they were facing much more challenges. So it's interesting to know that something about their journey make them more resilient. And children who were from immigrant background were coming up higher on abilities. Perhaps they had much better schooling. Therefore, they were sort of their skills were much more developed. So we were interested in what happens, what's the factors contributing to acculturative stress and acculturation. So kids who were, sorry about that, I don't know how to, Okay, I'm just not going to worry about it. Kids who were very low level of school belongingness or had psychological problems or trauma were experiencing acculturative stress. Oh, sorry, something happened to my slides now. Oops. Okay, so Gail, I think something happened and this connection with slides is gone. Sorry about this. So,
oh, that's okay.
Gail, could you, maybe they got closed or something accidentally.
I'm wondering if she's there. Perhaps, are you able to maybe just keep
I am, yeah,
oh,
sorry. Yeah, sorry, I didn't take myself off mute. I was talking now. Nobody was listening. Okay, I'm sharing again.
Okay,
I don't
thank you.
know why that happened. Sorry.
Just to let.
So I will take control. Request. It's very. And okay. Somehow I'm not able to move into the slideshow format, so I probably won't worry about that at the moment. So let's see if I can get to that slide.
Nigar, what slide number were you on? Do you recall?
I think when I was going to start talking about children. See, and then I go down. Okay, I think I was here. I think I was here. I don't get that now. Okay, so I was here. Oh, no. Okay, I'll go up. I'm sorry about this. I don't know. Technology can be very challenging at times. So bear with me. Okay, so I'm just not able to move up a little bit. I want to be on 39, slide number 39. Okay, so all right, okay, thank you very much. All right, so basically what we learned that if children feel that they're not fitting in their school, and then on top of it, there's trauma and psychological symptoms, they are going to experience acculturative stress. And if, as the children who are a bit older in age and they feel that they are fitting in and there is a connection with the school and also there is social support, they feel that they are adapting well and settling into the new society effectively.
Next slide.
Yeah, I think it just gets jammed somehow. All right. Next, we look at the factors associated with well-being and those who had permanent visa and they felt they're fitting in with the school. They were acculturating, adapting to the new environment and resilient, reported high level of well-being. Let me go on. Okay, so what it appears that social support, acculturation, and a sense of belonging promoted their well-being, but resilience was a mediator. So as you can see from this mediation analysis, social support really made the person more resourceful and more resilient, and then well-being increased. Similarly, school connectedness and acculturation impacted resilience, and then the well-being increased. So we really try to figure out what is going on with these people. Next. Okay, we were interested in saying what are the factors leading to the academic success, and we found out that English is playing a big role. If there is loss in their life from pre-migration sort of experiences, that's going to dampen the students' academic progress. And if they're bright, they have high abilities, that also helps them learn English and settle well. And if they're lacking support, then that's also dampening their academic success. Okay, so longitudinal research results indicated that after 12 months, those who knew good English was also doing well, but there were a small number of people who were distressed and they needed more support. Learning support was required, and that helped them with the schoolwork. So next, we sort of changed our methodology and moved to digital storytelling, where we asked the school staff as well as the children and the parents of these children to record their experiences digitally in little video clips. And the goal was to find out about what are the strategies that the school is using that's promoting the belongingness among the children. And we found out that where the schools are really very proactive in helping these students and their families, that's a very good sign. Plus, if the schools are playing a very active role in building a supportive environment and relationship, and also connecting school enhancing school connectedness, they're all a good sign. So by school connectedness or a sense of belonging, it means that kids felt that they were important, their culture was important, they were valued, they had a voice. So that they were the type of experiences that enhance their sense of belongingness. Next, we took all this information and developed a manual, and we trained a number of principals from various high schools with the idea that they can go and promote this type of activities in their own school and help the children who are from other cultural backgrounds, as well as the families. Okay, so I was a few years ago invited by Brisbane Catholic Education to sort of explore what's going on with some of the kids who, despite a lot of academic support, are just not doing well. So these were kids who were given a lot of support with learning English language or other subjects, but they were not performing as expected. So what I found out is through various very in-depth case studies that there was a lot going on. For example, these kids left home when they were young, they witnessed deaths, they stayed in camps, they were exposed to makeshift schooling, which was often in different languages other than what they were speaking in their own families. They endured years of transit. Then they arrived in Australia with incomplete families. Sometimes they didn't know where some of the family members were. They were just lost or kidnapped at the camp, or some family members died. And then there was this ongoing stress, which, of course, the teacher was not picking up. The teachers just saw that this kid is not doing well academically. It's very important for the schools to be aware of the fact that there could be a lot going on with the trauma background, and these kids need to be assessed and investigated, because it's otherwise there's a danger of putting them in a too hard basket, or just to think that they are not bright enough. So the information that was collected was then used to develop a manual and a framework for school psychologists. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about assessments, because as a clinical psychologist, we are using multiple methods to gather information. Of course, there's interviews and observation, but we also use checklists. And most of these checklists are developed in the West and validated in the West. So my first task was to start validating some of the important checklists for our call people, and then to develop new checklists. But there's an ongoing challenge. So let me go through the challenge. Okay, the challenges with the paper and pencil measures is that it's very cumbersome to go through this translating and back translating process. And even though you've done a lot of work, there is no guarantee that they are culturally valid, because the concepts which you are trying to measure may not be adequately represented through the translated material. Still, there's a reliance on language. And if you think of Australia, we have so many language groups. How far are you going to go translating these skills in so many languages? So then with my students, we thought about other ways, and we used pictures. These pictures were developed by another colleague for emotional intelligence, but Etkin, and what we did was that we used them turned them into questionnaire, and we used this with students at school, and we found out that they can be divided into 3 factors and could be used as a questionnaire, when instead of a statement, you see a picture, and the child will just have to point out to the answer and indicate whether they have been experiencing this type of emotion or not. So after trying it with the children, we moved over to adults. And so this is recently with a couple of my honors students, we developed lots of these pictures, which are very vague. Purposely, the gender is not very clear. There are different background colors to indicate different skin tones. And instead of reading like statements like "I have a headache," "I'm feeling lonely," or "I have trouble with my family," people are actually looking at these pictures and then figuring out if they are experiencing these emotions or not. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the intervention. I'm very mindful of the time. So of course, there's a need for intervention with these populations, and we have to boost their acculturation and also their resilience. So I worked with Queensland Health, where we developed, sorry, I think this slides are deciding to, okay, so the temperamental. Anyway, so there was a program developed by Queensland Transcultural Mental Health, which is part of Queensland Health, and they developed it for children and for adolescents, and then I became part of it with the adult version. And basically, it's a group program where the goal is to enhance the acculturation and skills of people, and also to enhance their resilience through coping, in promoting their cultural strengths, enhancing their network, and the strategies that they have to use to deal with role and intergenerational conflicts, and enhancing their social connections. So it's run as in group format. It's a manualized program. You could do it weekly. You could do it in intensive mode, and it's didactic as well as experiential. So take through. Okay, as you can see, there are lots of different parts to this. And then my goal was later on to examine the effectiveness of these programs, and the data that was collected indicated that they do increase the acculturation, resilience, and well-being of the participants. From there onward, what we did was, let me just, sorry, okay. Oh, okay. So the next step was, due to the COVID, we were planning to do individual sessions, but as we had restrictions, so we tried this program online, and that also worked effectively. And then we extended it to the called families. So that was done in person, but we found out that this program could also be extended to the called families. So from there, I've also tried other creative and expressive methods. Art is one of the way of going about, and in one of the study, art was used by art therapists to help the rehabilitation of children who are coming from refugee background, and the data indicated that there was improvement, and all the measurement was done, or the measures were completed by the teachers who didn't know what was going on. So they were just completing questionnaires about the children, and then we examined them to see whether the teachers were noticing any change. And the data indicated that teachers did note change as a result of the children participating in such activities. Okay. But the next, I have also tried, it's another art-based program which is known as Tree of Life, and it's a part of the narrative therapy, where instead of talking about trauma, we take the person or a group of people through a drawing experience, where they draw the roots, and the roots are really their own roots. They draw the ground, which is their day-to-day life. They draw the trunk, which is reflecting their own personal skills, and the branches are their hopes and dreams, and then the flowers or the fruit are the gifts they receive from other people. So by having this conversation, people become aware of their own resiliences. And once they are very well informed about the resilience, we gradually talk about storms and what happens to the trees and storms and the storms in their own life. And this is how the trauma is then handled. This was tried with children and it reported improvement, but we also tried over with elderly women and young women also. And I'm trying to just, okay, so I was then invited by the Islamic Women Organization because they were concerned about marginalized older women who were in the 60 to 80 bracket. And so tried it with them also. Some of them spoke English, so we used just English language. Some were from Bosnia and just spoke the Bosnian language, so we had to do it through interpreters. So this is this helped them talk about their own traumas of the past and sort of enhance their personal strengths and well-being. This with a colleague, this was tried in UK with the women who were part of the genocide in Africa and who were raped, and then they had children also as a result of it. So these women then moved to UK as refugees while the children stayed back in their own countries of origin. They were in severe pain, as you can understand. They were grieving, but they also, because of being sort of molested sexually, they contracted HIV, and they were also living with HIV. So again, this method was very helpful and allow these people to talk about their traumas in very safe environment. All right, so now recently my focus has been on stakeholders to find out from consumers as well as from clinicians and the managers of various organizations what their experiences are with the different programs and what do they suggest about future. So the participants indicated that there is overall a dearth of program and there's a very limited funds available. So whatever is developed really around the fund. If the fund is very limited, the developers are just not going to invest a lot of time in developing the program, but just put something together for a short time. And then once funds run out, the program also stops. So, but the suggestions were that we should have programs which are preventative in nature, and they should be developed in consultation with the ethnic communities. They should be run by ethnic leaders and trusted people. They should be holistic and flexible, and we should go for an outreach program because these people are not going to come to the clinics or hospitals or universities. We'll have to go to them, to the communities. And in these programs, we should enhance the communication, the interpersonal skills, the family and parenting skills, enhance the sense of belonging, the connection with the country of origin, as well as the host society. We should enhance their acculturation and also improve their mental health literacy. Now, where are we now? So we have to keep in mind that we have a very culturally diverse society. Migrants and the refugees bring in a lot of resources, and they come with their personal resilience and lots of good coping strategies. However, there's a small proportion of this population that's not doing well. They are dealing with the acculturative stresses and mental health issues. Therefore, we need better policies and procedures for these people. We need to do something about better education in English language and better employment opportunities. We need to have better scales, which are valid, and perhaps we have to forget about the paper and pencil and try other ways which are without any language, perhaps drawings. And we should then be developing more culturally responsive, sensitive, and safe programs which are community-based. And there's much more work required as far as training of mental and allied health professionals is concerned. And finally, at the larger society, we should increase education of the public, and we should also enhance intercultural activities in the society. And with this, I'd like to thank you. And I'm apologies if there were sort of challenges with the slides.